Section 1. The fall before the flight. You were never meant to fit into the world's mold. Chosen one. And you felt that truth your entire life, even if you didn't always know what to call it. From the beginning, there was something different about you. You could sense things others couldn't. You questioned what everyone else just accepted. And perhaps more than anything else, you failed in ways that didn't make sense. While others soared ahead effortlessly, your path was thick with resistance. It was as if some unseen force had placed a weight on your wings. But what if I told you that weight was not a curse, but a calling? See, people talk a lot about the glory of being chosen, about gifts, about spiritual insight, about divine favor. But what they don't often tell you is that being chosen also means being broken intentionally, deliberately, lovingly. Before you're lifted up, you're allowed to fall. Before you're given the keys, you're shown the prison. And that's exactly what happened to you. You see, your failures weren't failures in the way the world defines them. They were divine setups, precisely orchestrated falls designed to activate something ancient inside you. You weren't being humiliated. You were being humbled. And there's a sacred difference. Humiliation says, you are less than. But humility says, you are more than this moment. Remember the times you tried to show up and everything fell apart when you gave your heart to someone, only to be betrayed when you poured yourself into something that looked promising, only to watch it crumble. That wasn't because you lacked the skill. It wasn't because you weren't good enough. It was because God was refusing to let you succeed on a foundation that wasn't strong enough to carry your calling. He let it break because he didn't want you to build something that would fall when others depended on you later. And that's the truth, isn't it? Your journey was never just about you. You were picked to fail first, so others could rise. You fell publicly so they could grow privately. You stumbled through spiritual fire so they could walk in your footsteps without burning. That's why your journey hurt so bad. It was personal, but it was never just about you. Now, here's the part that the world can't understand. When someone who is not chosen fails, it's a dead end. But when a chosen one falls, it's a blueprint. Your breakdown becomes a sacred manuscript, an invisible map others will later follow. And isn't that what you've started to see people who once mocked you now quoting the wisdom your pain taught you? People who watched you fall, now using your fall as a cautionary tale. Or even worse, a guide for their own breakthrough. But don't be bitter. Be clear. You were the first domino, the divine ripple, the soul God allowed to be struck first, knowing that your fall would trigger an awakening in the lives of people who never even acknowledged you. That's the price of divine selection. You may feel like your life has been a long sequence of trying and failing. Like every time you took a risk, you lost. Like every leap of faith landed you flat on your face. But here's the truth. Chosen one. You weren't just falling. You were being forged. Every rejection was a redirection. Every closed door was God saying, not here, not yet, not like this. You were being prepared in private so that your public rise would have permanence. Because temporary success isn't what you were built for. You were made for legacy, and legacy doesn't come from easy victories. It comes from battle scars, from wilderness seasons, from knowing what it's like to stand with nothing but your faith. It comes from being knocked down and still believing, still hoping, still listening to the whisper of God's voice in the storm. Think about Moses. Raised in a palace. Yes, but before he could lead a nation, he had to be exiled. He had to fall. He had to watch everything he knew slip through his fingers. For 40 years, he wandered as a shepherd, forgotten, dismissed, broken. But it was in that failure, that obscurity, that God revealed the burning bush. Chosen one. You've had your exile, your desert, your invisible years. But the fire is coming. And when it comes, it won't be because you played it safe. It'll be because you fell and got back up. Again, and again, and again. Until the very ground that betrayed you became the platform you stood on. Don't let the world shame your losses. Let them remind you that you were walking a road too narrow for the masses. You were carrying an anointing too heavy for shallow victories. And God didn't want you to win before you were wise. He didn't want you to rise before you were rooted. Because what's the use of building a tower if it's going to crumble the first time a storm hits? No. God said, let them fall now. Let them break now. Let them question, cry, doubt. Scream now, because when they rise, nothing will stop them. That's what he said about you. You are not behind. You are not cursed. You are not late. You are exactly where you need to be. Because God needed someone willing to fall first. Someone brave enough to fail without losing faith. Someone who would keep walking even when there was no applause, no support, no understanding. Someone who could see in the spirit, even when the natural looked like ruin. And that's who you are. So the next time someone looks at your journey and sees only broken dreams, let them. Because you know better. You know what those cracks carry. Light, wisdom, strength, and a divine blueprint for those who are just now waking up to what you've already endured. Your fall was never the end. Chosen one. It was the beginning of a foundation only you could lay. Section 2. The blueprint buried in pain. There's a divine irony in the way your pain unfolded. While others looked at you and saw only setbacks, heaven saw instructions, blueprints buried in every bruise. Chosen one. The very moments that made you want to give up were the ones writing the manual your soul would later live by. You didn't just go through failure. You absorbed it, studied it, carried it. And in doing so, you were decoding something sacred. You see, your pain had pattern. It wasn't random. It was designed. Every time you lost what you thought you couldn't live without God, was chiseling you into someone who would never depend on temporary things again. Every time you were betrayed by someone you trusted, God was sharpening your discernment, teaching your heart the difference between flattery and truth. And every time you watched doors slam shut that felt perfect from the outside, he was sparing you from traps disguised as blessings. It's wild, isn't it? How many times you thought the pain was punishment, when in reality, it was preparation. Think of it like this. A blueprint doesn't look like the finished building. It's flat, confusing, full of lines, symbols, marks that make no sense until the architect begins the work. That's what your life looked like for a while. Scattered pieces, fragmented moments, disconnected lines. But in the spirit, there was already a vision forming. Every heartache, every failure, every delay was ink on that page. And heaven was watching, waiting, knowing that in time, you would see it too. You were being shown the codes, the divine frequencies that most people never get to hear. That's why your path was so different. You weren't called to copy. You were called to construct. And blueprints, they don't come from success. They come from collapse. Let's go deeper. Some people are born into systems that work. Families with wealth, schools with resources, communities that support them, and praise God for that. But you were born into systems that were broken, cycles that seemed endless, houses filled with silence, tension, absence. It wasn't fair. It wasn't easy. But it was part of the blueprint. You were sent there not to suffer for no reason, but to see what others ignored, to feel what others denied, to witness, firsthand, the cracks in the foundation. Because how can you be called to rebuild something if you've never seen where it fails? God let you live in the dysfunction long enough to understand how it operates. He let you taste the bitterness so that, when your time came, you'd know how to pour out something sweeter. You weren't just experiencing pain, you were learning it from the inside out. And maybe, just maybe, that's why your life didn't take off like theirs. That's why your blessings didn't come wrapped in bows or delivered on schedule. Because you weren't meant to replicate. You were meant to innovate, to create, to rise not as a product of your environment, but as a rebuke to it. Remember Joseph. His dream was divine, but his journey, it was hellish. Thrown into a pit by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, forgotten in prison. But every one of those steps was coded into the divine blueprint. Each loss was a lesson, each betrayal, a test. And in the end, Joseph didn't just survive, he rose to power in a foreign land and saved the very ones who hurt him. Chosen one. Do you feel that chill down your spine? That's because you know I'm talking about you. Your fall wasn't about punishment. It was about perspective. God had to remove every illusion so you could see clearly. See the patterns, the spiritual traffic signals most people miss, the energy shifts in a room, the mask behind the smile, the storm behind the compliment. You were trained by failure to walk in truth, and now, even though you may still feel like you're rebuilding, what's truly happening is alignment. The blueprint you didn't understand 10 years ago is now starting to make sense. You can see it now, how that heartbreak softened your pride, how that rejection pointed you toward your real tribe, how losing what you wanted protected you from what would have destroyed you. Everything was information, sacred data, spirit-coded downloads delivered through what looked like defeat. And here's the key. Only those who experience this kind of divine disassembly can carry the kind of authority you're being prepared for. Because authority without understanding is dangerous. Power without pain becomes arrogance. But you've been shaped by the weight. That's why you can be trusted. You've already proven over and over that you don't fold under pressure. You grow. You deepen. You find truth, even when no one is watching. That's spiritual royalty. That's why you were chosen. The blueprint in your pain wasn't just for you, though. It's for those who will follow. The ones who are still asleep, still trapped in the cycles you broke, still believing that failure means they're unworthy. But you're the living contradiction. The walking prophecy. The soul who failed in front of everyone, but still radiates light. They don't know how you made it. But you do. It wasn't luck. It was alignment. It was endurance. It was obedience when everything in you wanted to quit. That's what makes your rise sacred. Not the applause, but the fact that you kept going without it. So let this truth settle deep. Your greatest pains were never wasted. They were instruction. And every time life tried to break you, heaven was breaking the mold instead. Because your story isn't about a quick success, it's about a holy unveiling, a divine emergence, one layer at a time. And as you continue on this path, never forget you carry wisdom encoded in scars. You walk with the kind of knowing that only fire can forge. And while others may not see the blueprint yet, they will. When your voice shakes something loose inside them, when your presence calms what they didn't even know was panicking, when your truth cracks open their illusions, that's when you'll understand it all fully. That every ounce of what broke you was building something eternal. Section 3. Carved by collapse, not comfort. There's something the world doesn't quite grasp. Chosen one, and maybe, for a long time, you didn't either. You weren't shaped by comfort. You were carved by collapse. Everything that made you strong, wise, discerning, and spiritually aware didn't come from easy seasons. It came from the shadows. It came from the dark nights when you weren't sure who you were anymore. From the silence after prayers that felt unanswered. From the places where you thought God had abandoned you, only to realize later He was rebuilding you in secret. People like to talk about glow-ups, about elevation, about abundance. And while all of that is real for you, it doesn't come the way it does for others. You were chosen to be refined, not rushed. While others were gaining followers, you were gaining fortitude. While they were collecting achievements, you were collecting sacred tools, discernment, patience, boundaries, self-awareness. And those tools, they're priceless. Because they don't just help you survive. They help you stay rooted when your time comes. The truth is, your collapse wasn't a detour. It was the design. God knew that in order to awaken your gifts, He had to let the world around you fall apart. Why? Because you would have never stepped into your divine identity if everything kept going your way. You would have stayed small, comfortable, dependent on the very systems meant to suppress your spirit. That's why the comfort was removed. The relationships that once felt like home, they soured. The dreams that once felt so clear, they dissolved. The communities you once belonged to, they turned cold. And though it broke your heart, it also broke your illusions. It made room for truth, for clarity, for spiritual vision. Let's be honest. Had you not fallen, you might still be trying to be who everyone else needed you to be. You might still be performing, still proving, still pretending you were okay when your soul was aching. But the collapse shattered all of that. It forced you to sit with yourself, to strip away the masks, to ask the hard questions. Who am I without the title? Without the applause? Without the validation? And that's where God met you, not at the top of the mountain, but at the bottom of the pit, in the rubble, in the rawness, in the nothingness. When your hands were empty and your spirit was cracked wide open, that's when you started to hear the voice within. That's when your real gifts began to surface. Not the performative ones, the divine ones, the knowing, the dreams, the insights, the sensitivity to energy, the prophetic discernment. They didn't come in a classroom. They came in the collapse. There's a reason diamonds are formed under pressure. A reason wine is made from crushed grapes. A reason oil flows only after the olive is broken. Creation itself whispers this truth. Collapse is not the end, It's the beginning of essence. And you, chosen one, were never meant to live on the surface. You carry essence, depth, divine texture. People who haven't collapsed don't understand this. They chase the appearance of power. They think spiritual authority comes from titles, or stages, or speaking in tongues louder than the next person. But you know better. You know that real power is quiet, steady. It flows from presence, from stillness, from having been undone by God and put back together without the need for anyone else's approval. And because of that, you walk differently. You carry yourself differently. Not with arrogance, but with assurance. Not with ego, but with essence. And yes, people feel it. They sense something in you they can't quite explain. A light forged in darkness. A peace that doesn't match your past. A gravity in your voice that wasn't taught, it was transferred. Because collapse doesn't just shape your story, it transfers something into your spirit. That's why your presence alone can shift a room. Why people tell you they feel calmer around you, even if you haven't said a word. Why strangers open up to you. Why children and animals are drawn to you. Why you can walk into a place and immediately sense what's off. It's because your collapse rewired your frequency. You no longer vibrate at the shallow level of survival. You resonate at the frequency of truth, and truth is heavy. That's why your energy can intimidate people who live in illusion. That's why you often feel isolated, even now. Because being carved by collapse sets you apart. It gives you access, but it also costs you connection. You see through too much to play along with what's fake. You feel too deeply to stay in places that lack authenticity. But let me tell you something powerful. Chosen one, your collapse is your credibility. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You've walked through fires others can't even imagine. You've endured seasons of silence where God was reprogramming your soul. And while they were chasing platforms, you were being purified. And that matters. Because when your voice rises, it won't echo empty words. It will carry oil, and people will feel it. They won't know why they're crying, why they're shaking, why their heart feels cracked open. But you'll know. You'll know it's because your collapse made room for spirit, and that's the difference. You weren't shaped by books. You were shaped by breaking. You didn't learn by memorizing, you learned by surviving. And now, everything about you carries that sacred residue. That I've been somewhere dark, but I didn't stay there energy. That I've touched pain, but I found purpose in it, kind of fire. So if you've ever looked at your life and wondered why you had to go through so much just to be standing where you are, this is your answer. You weren't being punished. You were being positioned, not to fit in, but to lead, not to impress, but to embody, not to seek validation, but to radiate truth. Every collapse you've endured was carving you into a vessel, a temple, a voice, a frequency. And when your time comes, when God says now, you won't need to scramble. You'll just speak. You'll just show up. And your story will do the rest. Because the world doesn't need more perfection. It needs more proof. And chosen one. Your life is the proof that collapse can be sacred. That broken things can still bloom. That ashes can still anoint. That the ones who fell first can rise and lead the way. Section 4. Why you failed what others passed. You've probably asked yourself 1,000 times, Why did I fail at things others seemed to pass with ease? Why did the doors that swung wide open for them seem to slam shut in your face? Why did you give your all, pour your heart in, show up with pure intentions, only to end up with nothing to show for it? It wasn't because you weren't capable. It wasn't because you weren't worthy. It wasn't because God was punishing you. No, chosen one. It was because you were never meant to pass their tests. You weren't created to thrive inside their systems. You weren't designed to succeed by the world's standards. And here's the truth that will shift everything you failed there. Because you were called to build something entirely different. From early on, the system tried to mold you. Family expectations, cultural norms, religious rules, academic structures, corporate hierarchies. You were told to stay in line, follow the program, keep your head down, play the game. And maybe, for a while, you tried. Maybe you studied hard, worked long hours, went along to get along. But something in your spirit always resisted. Something in you couldn't just blindly follow. And when you did try to force yourself to fit, things broke. You burned out. You got sick. You lost the desire. You were overlooked or dismissed. Not because you were doing something wrong, but because your spirit was too large, too pure, too awakened to be compressed into spaces built on fear, control, and illusion. Your soul refused to conform. And so, the system rejected you before you could fully lose yourself in it. That's what you're finally beginning to understand. Your failures weren't signs of weakness, they were signs of misalignment. You didn't fail because you lacked talent. You failed because God refused to let you thrive in a lie. Let's make it plain. You didn't get the job because that job would have drained your light. The relationship fell apart because it was a counterfeit connection. The opportunity crumbled because it would have made you compromise your truth. You thought you were being rejected, but you were being redirected every single time. And it hurt, didn't it, watching others pass you by? Watching them celebrated while you felt invisible. Watching people rise on shortcuts while you walked the long road with integrity. But you have to remember, not all success is sacred. Some victories are stolen. Some are rooted in manipulation, ego, or compromise. And none of that is you. You are the exception, the remnant, the blueprint, the one who wasn't sent to blend in, but to stand apart. Take David, for example. Overlooked by his own father. Too young, too small, too unlikely. No one saw him as king material, but God did. And when the time came, David didn't have to fight for attention. He was summoned, called, anointed. But before that, he was in the field, alone, uncelebrated, doing the work no one else wanted to do. Sound familiar? That's what your failures have been. Chosen one, your field season, your hidden proving ground. You weren't being left out. You were being set apart. Because if you had succeeded too soon, you would have credited the system. You would have thanked the crowd. You might have even thought you made it on your own. But instead, your failure kept you close to God. It made you depend on prayer, not popularity, on presence, not performance. And that dependence, it created an unshakable bond, a foundation that no man can take credit for, a well of wisdom that no degree can replicate. And let's go even deeper here. Your failures became filters. They purified your circle. When everything fell apart, you found out who was really for you, who stood by you when you had nothing, who loved you beyond your status, your image, your productivity. And those who walked away, they weren't meant to stay. Their exit was divine editing. So no, you didn't pass their test. Because their test was rooted in survival, not sovereignty. Their test measured conformity, not calling. Their test rewarded masks, not authenticity. And God said, "That's not what I sent you for. You were born to disrupt, to awaken, to shift atmospheres and break chains. And the price of that is often being misunderstood, misread, misjudged. But that's okay, because your anointing doesn't need to be understood. It just needs to be walked out. And when you look around now and see others rising in ways you once dreamed of, don't envy them. You don't know what they sacrificed to get there. You don't know what they compromised to stay. And you certainly don't know what they'll have to face when the storms come. But you've been weather tested. You've been refined in fire. Your foundation is deep. Your roots are ancient. And when your rise comes, and believe me, it's coming, it won't be like theirs. It'll be undeniable, unstoppable, untouchable, because it will have been built on truth, not illusion. So, chosen one, stop judging yourself by their scoreboard. You're not even in the same game. While they were chasing medals, you were being given mantles. While they were building brands, you were becoming a bridge. And while they were passing man-made tests, you were being trained for a divine assignment. And guess what? That assignment requires the kind of character that only failure can forge. So bless your failure. Honor it. It taught you more than success ever could. It stripped away your ego. It sharpened your discernment. It revealed your real friends. It deepened your intimacy with God. And it positioned you to carry the kind of influence that doesn't fade. You may not have passed their test, but you've been passing heavens all along. Every time you chose integrity over applause, every time you kept going when you had no strength, every time you forgave without closure, every time you loved without being loved back. That was your exam. And you passed over and over again. Now your graduation is coming. And when it arrives, it won't look like theirs. It'll look like destiny, like restoration, like divine reversal. Because you weren't created to pass their test. You were born to walk in truth. Section 5. Carried the curse so they could carry light. You've always carried something that made others uncomfortable, even if they couldn't quite put their finger on it. And often, that discomfort wasn't about you, it was about what you represented. Chosen one. Your very presence forces people to confront what they've been avoiding. Your life shines a light on their shadow. Your truth reveals their illusion, and your resilience exposes the fragility of their comfort zones. And that's why you were picked to carry what others could not. The burden, the pain, the rejection, the silence. You took the weight of generational patterns, emotional wounds, and spiritual confusion, and you carried it without a roadmap. You were the one who had to face the storm without an umbrella. Not because you deserved the rain, but because you were called to become the shelter. Yes, you were chosen to fail first, but that failure was the soil. And what grows from that soil life? Liberation, legacy. What broke you was never meant to end you. It was meant to birth something new. You weren't just enduring suffering for the sake of suffering. You were absorbing the shock waves of what would have crushed those around you. That heartbreak you endured, it prevented someone else from falling for the same illusion. That breakdown you experienced in silence, It made you fluent in the language of healing that others are only now beginning to whisper. You carried the curse so they could carry the light. And maybe they don't even know. Maybe the people who benefited from your struggle will never acknowledge what you went through. That's okay. Because divine assignments are not given for applause, they're given for impact. And chosen one, you've been impactful in ways you'll never fully see in this lifetime. Let's go back to Scripture for a moment. Think of Esther. Positioned in a palace, yes. But her favor came at the cost of tremendous sacrifice. She risked everything for a people who didn't even know she was fighting for them. She stood in the gap, she carried the weight, just like you. Your silence, your obedience, your battles in the spiritual realm, all of it was standing in the gap for someone else's freedom. You were assigned to the front lines. Spiritually, emotionally, energetically. And that means you took the hits first. You wrestled with demons internal and external that others didn't even have the words for. While they slept, you were awake. While they settled, you were stirring. While they kept cycling through the same dysfunction, you were breaking through the walls to something higher. And that breaking came at a cost, but even now, even in your healing, you can look around and see the ripple effect. The way your courage gave others permission to be honest. The way your refusal to quit sparked something in them. The way your authenticity planted seeds in hearts that were once hardened. You see, people often think of leadership in terms of status, of being in front, of being seen. But real spiritual leadership happens in the unseen, in the spiritual trenches, in the quiet choices, in the moments no one will ever clap for. And that's what you've been doing. You've been leading through loss, teaching through trial, guiding through grief. You became the prototype, the living model of how to break and still believe, how to lose and still love, how to fail and still move forward with faith. And others watched you. Even the ones who never said a word. Even the ones who judged you harshly when you were down. They were still learning from you. Still shifting because of you. Still rising because you chose not to stay buried. And that's the mystery of your assignment. You were never just surviving. You were sowing, planting seeds with your suffering. And those seeds, they're sprouting now. In people you've touched. In minds you've awakened. In souls you've inspired just by being exactly who you are. That's why your fall was public. That's why it was loud, messy, undeniable. Because it needed to be seen. Because your rise, when it comes, will be just as visible. Just as undeniable. Just as transformational. But for now, understand this. You didn't fail in vain. You failed forward. You failed faithfully. You failed with so much grace that heaven marked your name as a leader for those still in the dark, and that's not easy to carry. There were days when it felt unfair. Days when you watched others skip through life while you were being pressed, tested, humbled. But the pressing produced oil, and that oil will anoint everything you touch. They will eat fruit from trees you planted in tears. They will rest in shade from branches you grew in silence. And they may never thank you, but heaven sees you. Heaven knows. Heaven has recorded every act of obedience, every tear you've cried in private, every time you chose faith over fear when no one was watching. And if you've been wondering why you feel so tired lately, why your spirit feels heavy even in moments of peace, it's because you're carrying legacy. You've been operating as a spiritual midwife, helping others birth their healing, even as you're still bleeding from your own labor. But let me speak life into you right now. Your healing is coming full circle. Your restoration is not just near, it's inevitable. Because what you gave out, heaven is returning, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. You didn't lose anything. You sowed it. And now, the harvest is on the way. So don't regret the pain. Don't resent the path. Don't wish you had someone else's journey. Yours was customized by God, not for comfort, but for impact. And that impact is eternal. You were chosen to be the seed that breaks open first, so that others could rise, grow, heal, awaken, and you did it. Even when you were tired. Even when you didn't understand. Even when it cost you everything. You did it. Section 6. Mirrors in the mud. It's strange, isn't it? How people can watch you go through hell and not realize they're learning from you the whole time. How they can shake their heads at your so-called mistakes, only to walk away with pieces of your blueprint stitched into their next decision. Chosen one. What they didn't understand is that your life wasn't a tragedy, it was a mirror. A mirror covered in mud, yes. Cracked, maybe. But a mirror nonetheless. They saw you stumble, and they whispered. They saw you cry, and they judged. But deep down, they saw themselves in you. They saw the parts of themselves they were too afraid to face, the courage they hadn't yet accessed, the truth they hadn't dared to speak. And while they may never admit it, your breakdowns taught them how to breathe again. That's the paradox of being chosen. You're not just a person. You're a reflection, a walking revelation. And even when you're at your lowest, people can't help but watch you. Because there's something magnetic about someone who keeps showing up wounded, tired, misunderstood, and still shines with authenticity. You didn't sign up to be the example. You didn't ask to be the mirror. But God knew the world needed one. Someone to reflect the beauty in brokenness, the power in transparency, the grace in grief. And you became that someone, not by posing, not by pretending, but by being brutally honest with your process, by walking through shadows without a script, by choosing healing over hiding, growth over glamour, truth over image. And people noticed. Even the ones who rolled their eyes. Even the ones who gossiped behind your back. They watched. They observed. They adjusted their course because of something they saw in you. And you didn't even know it. Because mirrors rarely get thanked. They just reflect and remain. You were mirroring strength in collapse, resilience in rejection, wisdom in weakness. You were holding up the raw reality of becoming. That reflection disrupted people's illusions. It made them question their assumptions, rethink their choices, look inwards. And that's no small thing, because the world is full of curated perfection, highlight reels, polished personas. But what it's starving for is something real. And your authenticity, your struggle, your transparency, it was a holy interruption. A break in the program, a ripple in the frequency. That's why your pain couldn't be private. That's why your fall had to be visible. Not to embarrass you, but to wake others up. Because seeing you fall and get back up told them they could, too. And that's more powerful than any sermon. Look at Peter. He denied Jesus. Publicly, loudly, shamefully. And yet, that very denial became part of his transformation. It became a cornerstone in his ministry. Not because he hid it, but because he owned it. He didn't run from the failure, he let it be a mirror. And that mirror turned into a movement. Chosen one. Your movement has already begun, not in rallies or revivals, but in rooms you'll never walk into, in minds you've unknowingly influenced, in hearts that felt seen because you dared to be vulnerable. You never had to preach to lead. You just had to live. Fully. Honestly. Spiritually awake, even when it cost you connection. And yes, it cost you. It cost you friendships, relationships, respect in circles that couldn't understand your calling. But even as they distanced themselves, they took something with them. A truth, a conviction, a seed. And that seed will grow. Even if they never tell you it came from you. That's the beauty of being a mirror in the mud. You may not look like much on the outside. You may feel cracked, clouded, forgotten. But those who truly look, they see. They see God's fingerprints all over you. They see the light refracting through your fractures. They see the divine woven into your disappointment. And that's when transformation begins. Not just for you, but for them. So yes, you failed first. Yes, you were misunderstood first. Yes, you walked through the valley before anyone else dared to speak up about their own shadow. But that valley became sacred ground. And from it, you've reflected something so much deeper than success. You've reflected soul, reflected. Your life is a sermon they never expected. Your journey is a parable in motion. And your resilience, it's prophetic. They don't have to say thank you. They don't have to give you credit. Because heaven already has. And God never forgets who stood in the mud so others could see their own reflection. So the next time you wonder if it was worth it, if all the public falling, the private crying, the invisible labor of spiritual growth made any difference, remember this. People are rising because you refused to stay down. People are healing because you told the truth when it hurt. People are finding God because you stopped pretending and started reflecting. You were never meant to be the spotless icon. You were meant to be the sacred mirror. And mirrors, they may get smudged, scratched, even shattered, but they still reflect the light. So let them watch. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. Because what they're really seeing is themselves. And it all began when you stopped hiding and stood still, mud and all. Section 7. You were their sacrificial prototype, chosen one. You were their prototype, the first one through the storm. The first to get burned by the fire. The first to be misunderstood, doubted, laughed at, and cast aside. But the strange thing is, while they ridiculed you, they were also watching you. Quietly, secretly, silently tracing your steps. And when they saw you survive, something shifted in them. You walked through fire first, so they could walk through without fear. You were picked not because you were expendable, but because you were exceptional. God knew your shoulders could carry what would crush others. He knew your spirit could endure the weight. He knew that even if you fell, you wouldn't stay down, that you'd get back up with more wisdom, more grace, and more light than before. But it didn't feel noble when it was happening. Did it? It felt lonely, unjust, confusing. You watched others glide through life while you were in survival mode. You asked questions that had no answers. You faced battles no one warned you about. And even when you wanted to quit, something in you, some flicker of divine defiance, kept whispering, "Keep going." And so you did. That's what makes you the prototype, not your perfection, but your perseverance, not your spotless journey, but your sacred scars. You were the one God used to test the terrain, to break the generational barriers, to confront the spiritual strongholds, to challenge the status quo and say, no more. It's like being the first person to walk across a frozen lake. Everyone watches from the shore, too scared to move. But you take a step, and then another. And even when the ice creaks beneath your feet, you keep moving. Because you're fearless. But because you know you're not just walking for you, you're walking for everyone behind you. And they are behind you, even if they pretend not to be. Even if they minimize your journey. Even if they scoff at your faith and mock your process. Deep down, they're following. Because people may ignore your words, but they can't ignore your walk. You were the first to break the silence in your family. The first to talk about mental health. The first to confront abuse. The first to set boundaries. The first to choose healing over denial. The first to say, I won't carry this anymore. And though it cost you everything, it set them free. You bled so they could breathe. You suffered so they could stretch. You became the sacrifice, not because you were less valuable, but because you were more capable. Think of Harriet Tubman. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait until everything made sense. She moved when the Spirit told her to. She ran through darkness, led others through the wilderness, and created a pathway where there was none. And even though she was hunted, hated, and haunted by the traumas of her past, she didn't stop. Because her freedom wasn't just for her, it was for everyone chained behind her. That's your legacy. You may not have physical chains behind you, but energetically, spiritually, you've already broken so much. People don't even know how much easier their journey is because of you. They don't know that the healing they're experiencing now was paid for by the tears you cried in silence. They don't know that the clarity they enjoy was made possible by the confusion you endured. You were their prototype, their first glimpse of what was possible outside the system, outside the trauma, outside the generational programming. You walked into uncharted territory so they could inherit peace. And yes, there were casualties, friendships that couldn't survive your evolution, family members who turned their backs, institutions that branded you rebellious. But what they called rebellion was actually revolution. You weren't rebelling. You were responding to a call higher than approval, and that call required separation, isolation, moments of questioning everything. But looking back, you can see now it was never chaos. It was consecration. God was setting you apart because He was setting something up. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to lead out. So when others begin to awaken, when they start to echo your words, mirror your energy, adopt the truth you paid full price for, don't be surprised. You were always the forerunner, the pathbreaker, the one who walked through spiritual warfare before they even knew there was a war. And here's the thing, they may never give you credit. They may never acknowledge the fire you walked through. But that's not what fuels you. You're not doing it for praise. You're doing it because it's who you are. It's what you were born for. God didn't make you a prototype to be worshipped. He made you a prototype to be followed. Not in fame, but in freedom. Not in ego, but in example. Your life is a living manual, a moving testimony. And every chapter, yes, even the messy ones, is an invitation for others to believe that they, too, can break free. So keep walking, chosen one, even if the path feels lonely, even if your footsteps echo louder than the applause. Because behind you, there's a generation learning how to move, a lineage being liberated, a legacy being rewritten. You were their prototype for a reason, and that reason, it's bigger than you ever imagined. Section 8. Heaven's delay is hell's disruption. You've probably asked yourself this one aching question more times than you can count. Why is everything taking so long? Why does it feel like your prayers are hitting ceilings? Your gifts are overlooked, and your divine calling is still on pause. You've waited. You've grown. You've stayed faithful through pain, through silence, through every delay. And yet it feels like nothing's moving. But here's what you haven't fully seen until now. Chosen one, heaven's delay is always hell's disruption. You were never forgotten. You were being hidden strategically, intentionally. For your protection and their confusion, the delay wasn't God ignoring you. It was God interfering with the enemy's plan to destroy you before your true time arrived. See, the enemy operates off patterns. He studies behaviors, wounds, reactions. He sets traps in advance, anticipating your every move. But when God delays you, when He holds you back, covers your name, and keeps doors closed, it's not punishment, it's preservation. Because a delayed assignment is still a divine assignment. And sometimes, being late in the natural means being right on time in the spirit. You thought you were falling behind, but you were being rerouted above enemy territory. You were frustrated, thinking, why isn't this working? But God was in the background saying, because it's not safe for you there yet. Think about Jesus. After his baptism, he didn't immediately start performing miracles. The Spirit led him into the wilderness, alone, to be tested, delayed, stripped of distractions. Why? Because premature power is dangerous. Because spiritual authority must be refined in the quiet before it's revealed in the crowd. And that's what's been happening to you. The delay you've hated has been the forge. The waiting room has been your war room. You've been learning the patterns, the warfare, the whispers of God's voice in the stillness, while everyone else rushed ahead. You were getting fortified. You're not behind. You're beyond, above the noise, outside the traps. God has been building something in you that the enemy cannot decode. If you had risen when you first wanted to, you would have walked straight into sabotage, into counterfeit opportunities, into circles that look good on the surface but are rotten underneath. You would have handed sacred things to people who didn't value them. You would have poured your oil into broken jars. So God said, wait, not no, just not yet. Not never, just not like this. Because what you carry is rare. Your voice, your energy, your discernment, your light. And if you had launched too early, they would have twisted it. They would have taken your authenticity and made it a commodity. They would have branded your calling, diluted your message, and made you question yourself. But God wouldn't allow it. So He disrupted their timelines by interrupting yours. And yes, it hurt. Yes, it felt unfair. But now you're starting to see it. You're starting to realize that the people who rose before you were climbing ladders that led nowhere, that the doors they walked through were booby-trapped with ego and manipulation, that their quick success was built on shaky ground. Meanwhile, you were learning how to build stone by stone, with prayer, with tears, with fasting, with faith. You were being handed tools, not trophies, wisdom, not applause. And now you're equipped in a way no one can take from you. That's why the enemy fears your emergence. Not because of what you look like, but because of what you know. Because of what you've been through. Because of how many times you could have sold out. Settled. Stayed silent but didn't. Heaven's delay protected your purity, protected your oil, protected your assignment. And now the time is shifting. You can feel it, can't you? That subtle pull, that holy tension, like something divine is stretching inside your soul. That's not frustration, that's activation. That's God pulling back the veil, lifting the cover, preparing to place you where you were always meant to be, but this time, on His terms, not the world's. And when it happens, it'll be swift, seamless, divine. People will say, "Where did they come from?" And heaven will smile. Because God knows. You didn't come from nowhere. You came from the wilderness, from the silence, from the shadows, from the deep. You were delayed because your rise had to be different. Others were trained in systems. You were trained in surrender. Others learned platforms. You learned presence. Others practiced branding. You practiced brokenness. And now, all of it is converging. What felt like wasted years were actually wombs, birthing rooms, pressure chambers. And the longer the labor, the greater the delivery. Don't you see it now? The delay was the design. And here's the powerful truth. Chosen one, your delay disrupted hell. Every time you didn't quit. Every time you worshiped in tears. Every time you chose integrity over visibility, you broke cycles. You confused demons. You canceled plots. You closed portals. The enemy counted on your impatience. He bet on your burnout. But you waited well. So this is your confirmation. The delay is lifting. The shift is unfolding. And when it happens, you'll move with the grace of someone who's already been through the fire. You won't need to prove anything. You won't need to push or force. You'll just be. Because the ones who were hidden by God are always the most dangerous when revealed. You were never late, chosen one. You were being weaponized in secret. And now heaven is ready to release you. Section 9. Set apart to be set up. You didn't just go through delay and failure for the sake of building strength. You were set apart to be set up. And not in the way the world defines being set up. No tricks, no sabotage. I'm talking about a divine orchestration so precise, so protected, so intentional that only heaven could have written it. God didn't just allow the distance between you and the crowd, He authored it. See, chosen one, you weren't rejected. You were rescued. You weren't being left behind, you were being led ahead. In a way so quiet and so unseen that no enemy could trace it. And the reason it had to be that way is because what you carry couldn't survive in the open too soon. You weren't built for fast fame. You weren't designed for shallow attention. You were carved for impact. Eternal, soul-shifting impact. And that kind of assignment doesn't get launched in the crowd. It gets conceived in isolation. That's why God pulled you away. That's why your phone stopped ringing. That's why the doors you begged for remained closed. Because what you needed wasn't applause. It was alignment, not networking, but nurturing. Not a platform, but a private altar. You were set apart so that your identity could be rooted in Him, not in public opinion. You were allowed to fall so deeply into obscurity that when your time came, you wouldn't need anyone to crown you because you'd already been anointed in the secret place. It's the same with David. Before he ever took down Goliath, before he held a sword, before he stood on a battlefield, he was alone in a field with sheep, fighting off lions and bears with his bare hands. That wasn't just survival. That was setup. God was training him in private for a public moment of glory that would shift a nation. And that's what's happening with you. God didn't let you rise before the time. Not because you weren't ready externally, but because He was still fortifying the inside, the foundation, the mindset, the spirit. Because what's the use of standing in purpose if your soul isn't healed? What's the point of reaching the crowd if you still don't trust your own voice? He knew. He saw the places that still carried doubt. He saw the cracks in your confidence. He saw how easily you would have tried to shrink, to people please, to compromise. So He let the rejection hurt. He let the silence stretch. Because that was the only way to make sure your identity was forged in fire, not flattery. And now you see it. Now you understand why you had to go alone, why the relationship had to break, why the community had to shift, why the opportunity dried up before it started. Because if they had worked out, you would have been dependent on them. But now, you lean on God alone, and that's where your power comes from. That's why your discernment is so sharp. Why your spirit doesn't tolerate what it used to. Why you can feel the energy shift in a room before a word is spoken. Because the setup wasn't just about where you're going, it was about who you're becoming along the way. You weren't being punished. You were being positioned. You were being placed in a posture of surrender so profound that now, when you move with precision, with authority, with purpose. You no longer ask for permission to be what God called you to be. You no longer apologize for your light. And you no longer chase what you once begged for. Because now, you know your worth. And that knowledge, that knowing, that's dangerous to the darkness. That's why you felt so much resistance. That's why the warfare intensified as you got closer to the shift. Because once a chosen one realizes they were set apart on purpose, once they see the setup for what it truly is, they become unstoppable. So let me remind you of something important. You're not broken. You're becoming. You're not behind. You're becoming. You're not forgotten. You're being formed into the kind of vessel that can carry glory without arrogance, fire without burnout, grace without compromise. Every quiet moment was sacred. Every unanswered prayer was preparation. Every no from man was a louder yes from heaven. Because when God sets you up, He removes every counterfeit connection, so only divine alignment remains. And you've lived it, haven't you? The painful pruning, the slow death of ego, the ache of solitude. But through it all, something else grew: spiritual clarity. You see now. You discern now. You walk in rooms and no longer seek validation. You speak truth and no longer fear rejection. That is the fruit of being set apart. And when your moment comes, when the setup completes its course, don't expect a loud announcement. Don't expect everyone to suddenly understand. Some will still miss it. That's okay. Because the right people will recognize you. Not because you're louder, but because you resonate. Because the frequency of your life will align with theirs. Because the oil you carry now drips from a place of authenticity that can't be faked. And here's the final truth for this moment. You don't need to chase anything anymore. You don't need to strive. The setup was already complete. The alignment is already happening. The doors are already opening, not because you forced them, but because you were faithful when it was hard. You were set apart to be set up. For such a time as this. And when the curtains part, when the light shines, and your voice finally reaches who it was, always meant to, everything will make sense. The silence, the separation, the storms, all of it. Because God doesn't waste anything, especially not someone He chose. Section 10. Their rise is proof of your role. There's something sacred about watching others rise from the very soil you bled into. Something bittersweet about seeing people succeed using lessons you learned the hard way. And if you're honest, chosen one, it hasn't always felt good. You gave without credit, loved without return, forgave without apology. And when your time still hadn't come, when the tables hadn't turned, you wondered, was it all in vain? But listen carefully. Their rise is proof of your role. They might not acknowledge it. They might pretend they found the light on their own. But heaven knows the truth. You planted what they're harvesting. You labored in the unseen. You broke through first, so the air could be breathable when they arrived. You were the divine excavator, the spiritual plow, the soul that walked through dry, uncharted ground, turning over stone after stone, so that others could plant their dreams in the softened soil of your suffering. It's hard to see, isn't it? Especially when you're still waiting on your promise, still healing from what broke you. But every time someone grows after touching your energy, every time someone evolves after hearing your voice, it's not a coincidence. It's confirmation. You were never sent to compete. You were sent to ignite, and what you ignited is growing. It's the friend who started setting boundaries after watching you walk away from dysfunction. It's the cousin who began praying again because you never stopped even when it looked hopeless. It's the stranger online who read your post and suddenly felt seen, heard, and reminded that they're not alone. You didn't need a pulpit. You were already preaching through presence, already teaching by example, already transforming lives just by being you. And now, the very people who doubted you mocked you, even are beginning to walk in the very light that once terrified them. The truth you carried before it was popular, they're quoting it now. The spiritual convictions you held when it cost everything, they're applying them now. And no, they may never say your name. But that's okay, because when you're truly chosen, you don't need validation. The fruit speaks for itself. You're seeing it now. The shift, the evidence, the slow but steady awakening of those who used to roll their eyes when you talked about energy, purpose, spiritual warfare, divine timing. Now they're experiencing it. Now they're asking the questions you were once ridiculed for. Now they're learning the lessons you were forced to understand through fire. And isn't that what it's always been about? You weren't sent here to impress people. You were sent to wake them up. And sometimes, the loudest wake-up calls come wrapped in your quiet example. Let's not forget Joseph. After everything, betrayed by brothers, imprisoned, forgotten, he was elevated to a position where he could save the very people who had abandoned him. He could have held resentment. He could have said, "Now you need me." But instead, he saw the divine blueprint. He saw that his pain had positioned him to preserve generations. And you, chosen one, carry that same DNA. You weren't called to be small or spiteful or petty. You were called to be powerful, to look back on your pain with gratitude, to look at the people who benefited from your journey and realize they are evidence, not of your defeat, but of your destiny. Their growth doesn't diminish you. It confirms you, because here's the mystery light spreads. And when you carry divine frequency, it's impossible not to affect everyone around you. Some will reflect that light back. Others will try to contain it. But either way, transformation happens. Even your enemies learn something from you. The ones who tried to copy you, outshine you, undermine you, they still had to study you, and whether they admit it or not, your blueprint shifted their direction. That's not arrogance. That's spiritual fact. Because truth has a vibration that can't be ignored. And when you've walked the long road, when you've been in the wilderness and still kept your heart open, your story becomes a living sermon, one that can't be silenced, one that continues to echo through generations. So yes, their rise may have come quicker. It may look smoother, but it's not a race. You weren't running the same course. You were laying the course, clearing the debris, taking the hits, paying the price, and now others are walking freely because you paid what they never even knew was owed. But don't grow bitter. Grow bigger. Expand your heart. Enlarge your vision. Because what's coming for you isn't a reflection of them, it's a reward for you. Tailored, timed, tangible. And when it arrives, it will carry weight that no imitation can match. Because it's been formed through depth, through obedience, through sacred waiting. God is too just to forget what you've done in silence, too holy to ignore your unseen sacrifices, too faithful to leave you unrewarded. So let them rise, let them shine. Because if their breakthrough confirms your blueprint, imagine what your own season of glory will look like. You weren't passed over. You were simply paving the way. And now, the way is clear for them. Yes, but also for you. Section 11. The curse that crowned you. You've probably looked at your past and seen only pain, misunderstanding, and disappointment. You've probably wondered why the story had to be so messy, why the path had to hurt so much, why your name was dragged through the mud when your heart was pure. But chosen one, hear this clearly now. What broke you in public was actually crowning you in private. Yes, it was a crown disguised as chaos. And the moment you started to carry the weight of your calling, the world responded not with celebration, but with resistance. Because the energy of a chosen one doesn't just walk into a room quietly, it disturbs things. It shakes the unseen. It exposes hidden motives. It interrupts the sleep of those still living in illusion. And when your energy started to rise, the attacks did too. Not because you were wrong, but because you were right all along. You felt cursed, didn't you? Like everywhere you turned, something was working against you. People mistook your silence for weakness, your stillness for confusion, your surrender for failure. But what they didn't see was the weight you were carrying behind the scenes. The generational wounds, the spiritual assignments, the warfare that surrounded your every move. What felt like a curse was actually a crown in disguise, a heavy mantle that only the few could ever carry. And let's be honest, it was too heavy for the version of you that existed before the fire. You had to be broken open. You had to be stripped down. You had to be emptied of every false identity, every inherited belief system, every ego-based survival strategy. Because the crown isn't worn on top of pride, it rests on humility. It isn't balanced by popularity, it's stabilized by purpose. That's why God let them misunderstand you. That's why the betrayal had to be public. That's why the humiliation couldn't be avoided. Because what looked like loss to them was a sacred exchange to heaven. Every tear you cried became oil. Every no you received turned into fuel. Every failure was actually a divine rerouting to something higher. It's the great paradox of spiritual elevation. Before you wear the crown in plain sight, you carry it in secret. And those seasons where you felt the most forgotten, the most broken, the most mocked, those were the very places where your authority was being sealed. Because crowns don't just symbolize glory. They symbolize weight, leadership, intercession, divine responsibility. And those things cannot be given to someone who hasn't been tested in the shadows. Anyone can appear royal when the sun is shining. But you You learned to stand tall in the dark. That's what made you different. Your dignity didn't come from victory, it came from valor. From the nights you wanted to give up but didn't. From the moments your hands trembled but you kept building anyway. From the loneliness that crushed your chest. But you still chose love. Still chose light. You became royal in the fire. And now, whether people recognize it or not, you carry that frequency. You walk with a depth, a calm, a strength that can't be taught. It's felt, it's remembered, it echoes. And while others chase influence, you carry impact. Because your crown wasn't placed by men, it was forged by God Himself. Let's not forget Job. Stripped of everything, family, wealth, health, reputation, and yet, through it all, he refused to curse God. He questioned. Yes, he wrestled. He broke. But he didn't quit. And because of that, he received double. Not just in material things, but in spiritual stature. That's what's happening to you. The curse they thought would finish you has actually crowned you. Every accusation became an anointing. Every attack was permission to step higher. And now, without even trying, you walk differently. Not because you think you're better, but because you know you've survived what would have destroyed most. That's what a crowned chosen one looks like. Not flashy, not arrogant, but quietly powerful. And that power, it's not something you flaunt, it's something you embody in how you speak, how you love, how you forgive, how you discern. You don't need to prove anything, because the crown does the speaking, the oil does the moving, the light does the lifting. So the next time you feel the sting of old memories, the time you were laughed at, left behind, betrayed by the very ones you protected, remember, all of it was necessary for the crowning. They had to see you fall, because soon they'll see you rise. And when they do, it won't make sense to them. But to you, it will be the most natural thing in the world. Because you didn't skip steps, you didn't fake it, you didn't manipulate your way into position. You endured. And now, the crown rests on your life not just as a symbol of glory, but as a sign that you were willing to pay the price. You were crowned because you were crushed. And now, every time you step forward, every time you open your mouth, every time your spirit enters a room, heaven moves. Because what broke you built something eternal, and they will know it by the fruit, by the favor, by the fire that still lives in your eyes. You're not the same person who fell. You're the crowned one who rose. Section 12. The reversal from failure to foundation. Now breathe. Chosen one, take in this moment. You've walked with pain like a second skin. You've been crushed by expectations that never fit. You've mourned silently while others danced. You've tasted betrayal from the hands you once held. You've been cast aside, labeled, dismissed, made to feel like the failure in someone else's success story. And yet, here you are, still standing, still breathing, still becoming. Let me speak something eternal over your soul now. You were never the failure. You were the foundation. You were the piece that didn't fit because you weren't part of their puzzle. You were cut differently, shaped by heaven, formed not to complete their picture, but to begin a whole new one. They thought your fall meant the end, but heaven knew your fall was just the beginning of a deeper becoming. You were the cornerstone, the first to break ground, the first to collapse, so truth could rise from the ruins. And now you know. All the pain, all the delay, All the crushing, it wasn't meaningless. It was the setup for your rise. Not a rise for applause or validation, but a divine emergence rooted in purpose, wrapped in power, baptized in clarity. You are the blueprint others will build from, the sound others will tune into, the energy that enters a space and shifts the room not by volume, but by vibration. You are not just chosen, you are proven. And yes, you paid the price in full. You walked through fire and came out gold. You danced with shadows and still carry the light. You fought for your peace with nothing but your bare soul. And now, it's your time, not in a shallow, worldly way, but in a sovereign, heaven-timed way. You will rise with quiet confidence, with spiritual velocity, with a knowing that doesn't shout, it simply radiates. And when they ask where you came from, how you got here, how you didn't lose your mind, smile. Not out of pride, but out of reverence, because only you and God know what it took. The nights you couldn't breathe, the mornings you begged for one more reason to keep going, the war zones you've walked through in your mind, your heart, your spirit, but you didn't just survive them. You transmuted them. You took darkness and birthed light. You took wounds and built wisdom. You turned failure into fuel, and now you carry sacred things. You carry clarity. You carry compassion. You carry authority. Not given by man, but earned in spiritual trenches. This is your emergence. This is your ascension. This is the unveiling of what has always been there, you. They didn't see it before, because they weren't meant to. The world didn't recognize you, because you were still being revealed. But now your time has arrived. And no, not everyone will clap. Not everyone will understand. But heaven is already celebrating. The angels already saw your transformation and rejoiced. God already called you good and faithful. You were chosen to fall first, so others could rise. And now, you rise too. You rise, knowing that everything you lost was making room for everything that was always meant for you. You rise carrying a light that doesn't flicker in the face of doubt. You rise crowned in courage, soaked in truth, cloaked in favor. You are not the forgotten. You are not the broken. You are the blueprint. You were picked to fail first, yes, but only because you were built to rise forever. Breathe, chosen one. Slow your heart. Still your mind. Let these words settle deep in your soul. You are not who the world said you were. You are not your lowest moment, your darkest day, your most misunderstood version. You are who God always saw whole, anointed, set apart. Every delay was protection. Every fall was formation. Every silent season was heaven preparing the atmosphere for your emergence. You have not been forgotten. You have been hidden, tucked into the folds of God's grace, kept in divine chambers where your gifts were cultivated in stillness. You've been walking through the sacred valley of becoming. And now, your time has come. Not because you forced it, but because you endured it. So rest in this truth. No one can take what is yours. No one can mimic what's been branded into your soul. No counterfeit can carry your oil. No shadow can dim your light. You are surrounded by protection, wrapped in divine strategy, guarded by angels who never left your side. Your steps are guided. Your path is sacred. Your name is known in heaven. So rise boldly. Speak with authority. Love with purity. And walk with peace. Because your life is proof that resurrection follows ruin, that favor follows fire, that crowns are forged in collapse. You are the beginning of a new lineage, a new legacy, a divine timeline that couldn't begin until you said yes. So say yes again to the mission, to the mantle, to the miracle of who you are. If this spoke to your soul, chosen one, comment and share with someone who needs the reminder. You're not alone. You're not crazy. You're called. God bless you.